Strong recommendation on this tour. Don't schlep. Don't schlep. Stay up with us. Guys in the back, strong recommendation to stay together. You're going to miss the main explanation. We're going to be moving from site to site. You'll miss what we're doing. So this is a memorial that they built in 2006. Very understated. Jews were brought here near the end. Nobody knows exactly how many. 3,000, 10,000. Nobody knows. They were from the edge. Yeah, Tomasz is a little concerned for us. I don't get any ideas. They were shot, and their bodies fell into the Danube in front of us. So there's an attempt to try to memorialize this and to make it human because the numbers are just too staggering. So they don't think anymore that it was 6 million Jews killed during this period. The consensus is more about 5.8. What's the difference? When you talk in staggering numbers, it all becomes you become numb to it, and it all becomes impersonal. When you consider an individual shoe, and some of these are children's shoes, somehow the human dimension comes into it and becomes more real. Tomasz started to say on the bus that the Jews were such a central, vibrant part. Well, for example, in Budapest, this is true really almost every place Jews live, we excelled in every. I'm not saying a Nobel Prize is necessarily a sign of excellence per se, but it's at least the outside world judges it. A person who wins the Nobel Prize is achieving some excellence. So in Hungary, they kept track of, up until this period, how many Jews got Nobel Prizes. 60% of the Nobel Prizes of the Hungarians went to Jews. That was not limited to Hungary. Germany, by far, was the most cutting edge of all civilizations, especially the 19th, 20th centuries. They, of all the Nobel Prize winners, have 30% of all Nobel Prizes went to Germans, and of those, a third of those were Jews. So you see, the Jews, even when they're not holding in Torah and mitzvos, they excel and they dominate the society. And one thing about the Holocaust is it actually caused the destruction of the Nazis near the end. We're near the end of the story. We'll come back to the beginning later on. We're a little out of order in our chronology, but the Nazis were so focused on the destruction of the Jews, but they depended on the Jews for the efficient running of society. In every single area of society, Jews were the movers and shakers, and when they pulled the Jews out of those positions, they were replaced with incompetent, lesser people who couldn't do the job, and the whole system fell apart, not to mention their defenses against the Allied powers, and the Nazis fell apart in their zeal to destroy the Jews. The nature of the destruction, this is not typical of what happened. The overwhelming majority... try not to get too close to the edge there, please. A little out of it here. The overwhelming majority of the Jews, Tomasz mentioned, from Hungary in general, were sent to Auschwitz for the destruction. Almost everybody there was murdered. There was one famous train, an important story, the Kastner train, that somehow got away, Baruch Hashem. There was one gadol on the Kastner train, called the Satmar Rebbe of Yoel Moshe Teitelbaum, who survived because of that. Mamash.
It's not far from here.
No, it's in Eastern, but we're trying to actually give you several months worth of information, all packed into a couple of brief talks. But there were several processes that Tomasz started to refer to. The Nazis had a big job. It was complicated. So how do you take an entire people at the eve of what they call the Holocaust? There were some 10 million Jews in continental Europe. And the Nazis' plan was to round up all of them and murder everybody. But that's a huge, ambitious, nobody was ever so audacious in history before. How could you do that? So one of the first steps is you have to find them and ghettoize them and put them into places. The Budapest ghetto doesn't exist. It was taken down.
Actually, only for 2 months the ghetto existed.
Yeah.
And it was one of few ghettos which was not destroyed to the end, till the end.
But it doesn't exist today. It was destroyed. It was taken down and buildings were built there.
You mean wall, ghetto wall? Is there one?
There's a little remnant.
One remnant.
One remnant. They were ghettoized. Okay, that means they were displaced, usually lost all their possessions, and put in places where the Nazis control. Realized every step of the way, people died, people were shot, people were murdered, and afterwards they set up what was called the Judenrat. Tomasz mentioned as well, where Jews, on behalf of the Nazis, would work and try to organize the Jewish people in the ghetto to try to for the Nazis' end. And then they started in Hungary. It was with incredible efficiency because they were desperate. They were trying to kill the Hungarian Jews to the last one. Then they shipped them off on the trains. The trains themselves were inhuman. The cattle cars, and many people died. There were no bathrooms. There was no heating in the wintertime. There was no food, certainly. There was no water. And many people perished just in the trains themselves on the way to their end. This is at least one that when we go tomorrow to Auschwitz, you don't see all that much. The Nazis were keen on covering their tracks. They didn't want, for whatever reason, somehow they felt that people wouldn't know the entire story. They destroyed, we'll see the gas chambers. But here at least you have some kind of a visceral human memory of what happened. Rabbi Greenwald has something to share with us.
My wife's family. My wife's both parents.
Can I, as a general rule, because we're not used to doing this in Derech. In Derech we do everything. As a general rule, if you want to talk, we're big boys, go a distance and talk. If you want to be in the group, listen, Greenwald speaking. So those of you who are on the fringe of talking, move away or come and join us.
Not this direction, not this
Yeah, right,
direction.
not, well, you know.
Maybe.
Yeah, you never, you know.
Maybe
Come on.
talking, then jump.
My wife's both parents are children of Holocaust survivors, where in both families spoken about and lived and breathed. As getting into the family is something right away. My wife's grandmother, my father-in-law's mother, Perel Appeldorf, Perel ben Yechiel Michal, she came from Voretsky, Czechoslovakia, and she was told with her sister to run away to Budapest. And they disguised themselves and
Because nothing was happening in Budapest.
and got papers as goyim and lived as goyim as maids, housekeepers in Budapest. Her brother, three brothers eventually came. The story that's in the family, my wife said it over as if it's yesterday. Her grandmother has told her, and I told her that her grandmother's, my father-in-law's father's brother, Dov Bear ben Yechiel Michal, was hands tied, feet tied, and thrown into the river. And her other brother, who I met, Uncle Isaac, was tied, hands, and he bit his way out and survived.
Bit the ropes off?
Bit the rope off and survived, came out. She, by way of living as...
She again
is my wife's grandmother, my father-in-law's mother. I hear these stories all the time. We live with these stories. That I understand was what was going on here. That throwing Jews into water, tying them up, and another brother was Avram Menachem, I think, one of the ones shipped off to Auschwitz. As I was learning behind the Parshan Shmos on the plane, Paro, Kol Ben Yalod Yeora, Abas Techayim. I was thinking that really personifies. Her brothers were thrown into the river. One made it, one didn't. But she actually lived on, and I think as a schus to be we can say here that that little girl who had brothers who were thrown in the river. One survived, had a beautiful family in Borough Park, and she survived and has beautiful children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren in Yerushalayim. I think something we're going to be taking with us is we're representation of the Netzach, Netzachon, the eternity, and the survival, and I thought also just why was Paro using the water? He's really made a cheshbon that Kadosh Baruch Hu said he's not going to bring a mabul, so I'll use this since he's not going to bring me, neither can I give me that. But even bringing the mabul was using the base of creation to destroy. So they're using the base of creation to kill. But it goes the other way. Moshe Rabbeinu was saved on the water. And water is used to be constructive. Torah represents water. And the goyim of the world are using the pieces, the parts of the world Hakadosh Baruch Hu gave to enjoy and to grow from for destruction. And when they do it, they're not successful.
Even though she was the overwhelming exception that she survived, Baruch Hashem, most Hungarian Jews were destroyed. But here we are.
And she survived. We have her sitter in our house. She didn't know Hebrew, but it's full of tears, worn out. I saw her daven in Kippur, Chaim Berlin. They live right next to Chaim Berlin, and
she was connected emotionally.
Totally connected.
Similarly, I have my great grandfather was he's Hungarian, Zev Gershkovich before he became Gershkovich. But he had a wife and 2 kids, and when the Holocaust started, his family got split up, and he found out later on that his 2 kids and wife passed away, and he basically had to restart his entire life. And I feel like he went through so much, and to be right here, have a great grandson in Derech Sameach. That's how you know it's continuing on. That's how you know we're still strong. Baruch Hashem.
Right? That's our Gemara in Kedushin talks about. If you have a grandson already, great grandson, then you know there's Hemshech. Yeah. So first of all, what's the definition? They call it a shul, they call it a shul.
Rebbe takes you in.
They ask for Schechter. What's the difference between right-wing conservative, which a lot of the time they say they're keeping certain halachas, they hold themselves with Shomer Torah mitzvos, and the left-wing modern Orthodox, which sometimes on closer examination doesn't really look so Orthodox, right? And where do you draw the line? When it comes to shuls, where do you draw the line?
Where they have shilohs.
That's a hint. Where do you draw the line in shuls? With a kosher mechitza. That's quite literally, you know that you're in an okay shul if they have a kosher mechitza minimally. The Satmar Rebbe, also from Hungary, the Satmar Rebbe, he said the mechitza has to be completely obscuring any view of a woman, right? All the way from the floor to the ceiling. Much of the old, certainly the modern Orthodox world, relies on the lenient view of Rav Moshe Feinstein. 10 tfachim.
It can't be.
It can't be. That must be higher. That's why I'm hesitating. It's a more minimal kind of a dividing line. In many ways it's confusing. Where can you daven, where you can't? Which Lubavitch shul can you daven in? If they start talking about him as Moreno Boreno, as the creator of the universe, so that would be you cannot be there. Moreno Boreno, yeah, that's a little problem. Even if they start talking to the Mashiachisti, that he's the Messiah, then most poskim say you have to leave.
Oh, that's right.
So it's tricky, all this stuff. Anyway, this is Rav Moshe also addresses all these questions. So Moshe Feinstein, he said to go into a Reform synagogue is a similar problem of going into a church. It's called chashad. It looks like perhaps you're taking part, that you're a part of what's going on there, and you can't do anything as a Jew to look suspicious. So you can't go there, certainly while they're worshiping. He said, let's say it's a family occasion. Anybody here have Reform conservative relatives, cousins? Yeah, so they're making a wedding, and the wedding's outside, and they just want to go into what we call the sanctuary for a family photo. Moshe says he allows it. B'shas hatchak, when you need to, you're allowed to go in. He says it's pashnus. He says a baal nefesh, somebody who's really holding, would not want to go into such a place. But technically, it's not usur. We elected to go to the synagogue here that is properly Torah observant, and we'll simply look from the outside at the Dohány Street Synogogue, which remains a monument of some sort.
Is it functioning?
Yeah, it's functioning mostly as a museum because there isn't an active. To be an active Reform synagogue means usually Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They have little bits and things going on. They have certainly a lot of tourists who visit.
Thanksgiving, they have people over.
Yeah.
Rabbi, why is the Reform business so profitable if they only have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur?
So Avisha asked, why is Reform? Why do they do so well? I was going to become a Reform rabbi, right? And it was great. it was great because, first of all, the money was great. I told you, adjusted to inflation, I made much more, not even adjusted to inflation, I made much more, period, in the early 80s, in my early college years, teaching in a Reform synagogue, than I make as a Derech Rebbe. It was great money. But more than the money, honestly...
Cumulatively.
No, there's
40
like...
years is Derech Rebbe.
What? Yeah, right, cumulatively, yeah, 100%. But more than just that, the prestige of it all. You know, I got up there and I could just talk a good game, because I'm a talker. You probably don't realize that about me. And I could talk a good game and call it Judaism, even though it wasn't. And everybody say, wow, that was wonderful, because they knew much less than I did.
You make me question everything you ever said.
See? Now you can ask me Menalan and I try to cite my sources. Right? But it was very intoxicating, that world, you know, getting involved in it. Very exciting. And you can make in the upper 6 digits. You know, what's wrong with that?
No, but how do they actually make the money if they only have?
Oh, how did them? Oh, I'm
How
sorry.
did
I alluded.
it
I
work?
alluded. Avisha's original question. How do they get the money? So, anybody heard of? You probably would know some things. They call it Jewish guilt. Right? Those people understand that they should be doing something Jewish, and the rabbis tap into that. Honestly, after COVID, all the liberal denominations, so-called denominations, the conservative, the reconstructionist, the reform, are all on hard times. Because people realized once they couldn't go to shul that they didn't really need to go to shul and pay the exorbitant membership dues. So a lot of them are languishing. They have these big old fancy edifices, these fancy high-end real estate locations, but they have an aging population and no real chance of recruiting new members.
These trains aren't working. Discount light rail.
Tam można się prosto jechać.
Do you want more? It's just covered in other chocolate that exploded. You still want a
We'll be getting off soon. We'll be walking around. Bring what you need for mincha, whatever you like to have. Mincha, if you have a siddur, if you have whatever clothes you like to wear, right? And to walk around. I'm going to bring. I've earmuffs to keep the ears warm. In general, I looked at the weather. I don't know if the sites that I saw were accurate or not, but it looked like it's only -1, -2, which is below freezing, but just barely. So it's not that bad, and it does not seem to forecast rain or snow in our time in Europe.
It's very positive view.
Right? Very negative.
I don't want to be too negative.
Right? Anyway, so you have to stay warm, but the main thing you have to worry about is the extremities. Especially when we were outside for a long time, the ears and the toes and the fingers. This is the largest synagogue in Europe, the Dohány Street Synogoue, right on the left side here. So everybody get ready to get off. You can't stand for very long, so let's hop up and get right off.
I have a picture of this.
Can I take a picture of a Reformed service synagogue?
Yeah, hold on. What is your This area, in this place that no longer exists, was Herzl's birth date, and therefore people take a photo op and then throw away the picture. Yeah. Okay. Was Herzl a Russia? Or was he Tinuk Shenishba?
Absolutely.
He was a Russia.
Okay. Yeah. He did write really shockingly bad things about religious Jews. Right? Anybody read his novel Alt Neuland about his vision about a Jewish state written 50 years before there was a Jewish state, predicting that in 50 years there'd be a Jewish state? Pretty interesting that. But he writes Alt Neuland, that's what they named a city for him, the old new land, which is Tel, which is the old, and Aviv, which is spring, which is new. They dedicated to Herzl, Tel Aviv. So he had in the novel a vision of the creation of Jewish states where Jews and Arabs are working side by side, and the Arabs are so grateful for their Jewish cousins bringing their European brilliance and ingenuity and the whole colonizing spirit. And then upgrade the level of life for the Jews and Arabs together. There is a villain in Alt Neuland. The villain, of course, is the religious Jew. But don't worry, he's voted down and he gets his in the end. Right? Anyway, Herzl, you could say he's a Tinuk Shenish, but he doesn't know differently, probably like the majority of people associated with the Neolog synagogue next to us. The problem with Herzl is that he came to represent, he's not just an assimilated ignorant Jew, but he came to represent something that was anti-religious, and on that level, perhaps maybe he's a Nebuch Russia I know. It's a sort of paraphrase of Chaim Brisker's. Chaim Brisker Soloveitchik said there may be a Nebuch Apokorus, but like they still learn Apokorus. What are you going to do about it? Yeah, that's Herzl.
So was this the? He was way after. This is the reform.
Herzl lived a short life. He only lived in about 40 years. He died of a heart failure.
He was born here.
He was born here. He actually was
here.
We're very close to Vienna.
That's where
Vienna
he
and
developed
Pressburg. These areas were the breakout of the Enlightenment. If anybody's still absorbed, what is Enlightenment is the Jews can break out of the ghetto and be in the general society and get a secular education. And Herzl's family was very much at the cutting edge. They too were assimilated. And they moved eventually to Vienna. That's where he was a failed playwright and then a journalist and a bunch of things before he covered the fateful Dreyfus trial in 1892. And that's where
he covered it.
He covered it. He went to Paris, which of course was the cutting edge. Really, all these pieces, I know it sounds like we're just throwing out a bunch of random information. It all is part of the narrative to fill in the picture, to understand what's going on. In 1892, there was a career military Frenchman, Alfred Dreyfus, who was more French than Jew, but he was a Jew by birth, and they framed him in a transparently obvious setup to send him down for life for a murder he never committed. And it was a public scandal of epic proportions. And you have to realize the French were really seen as the cutting edge of the Enlightenment, of progress. Napoleon's revolution was égalité, fraternité, liberté, equality and fraternity and liberty and everything. And they were going to, and Napoleon had his own Sanhedrin, famous episode. We had a Sanhedrin, is new chances, new opportunities for the Jews. And Herzl saw, wait, in France, if this is what's going to happen to the Jews, the blatant anti-Semitism, there is no hope for Jews in the secular world, in any part of the world. We have to have our own state, our own militia. We have to build on ourselves, and we cannot rely on the Goyim. Well, he was right about the latter part. Cannot rely on anybody except for Avinu Shebashamayim. We certainly can't rely on the non-Jewish world for anything. And he's credited as being the founder of the secular state of Israel. He died, though, in 1903, before much really taken off. He was in favor of having a Jewish state in Uganda, famously. Everybody else in the World Zionist Congress voted it down, but he said anything. He was pragmatic. Whatever it takes to have the Jewish independence.
He's buried.
He's buried. I just took my morning share there. He's buried on Har Herzl, appropriately enough. He died here, and he was reinterred, and his remains were brought. The first thing they did in 1951, they brought his body there for burial. Later, they had his family. It's a classic story. I said Mendelssohn's family self-imposed kares. They had cut themselves off. So one daughter was a heroin addict and died of overdose. The son committed suicide right on the day of her funeral, and the other one was killed. Trudy was killed in Theresienstadt in the concentration camp. There was her son, Stephen Norman, was the one surviving member of the Herzl family who was in America. And he picked up Herzl's books in the 1940s and he's got all Zionists and didn't know that they existed. He never knew about his own grandfather and was very, very intrigued. But when he heard about his family's fate during the Holocaust, he jumped off the Washington Bridge. And there are no remains of the Herzl family.
He followed the tradition.
It did.
He followed the tradition of the family.
You hear the pattern. Yeah. So you have here what's called, those in the back might miss out if you're not, keep up with us. So you have here, while this was the ghetto, and the Jews in the ghetto were very, very squalid, difficult situations, all crammed together. They could not get out to bury their dead, so they made a makeshift cemetery, some 2,000 graves right over here. Yehuda, don't enter. Some 2,000 graves of Jews during that period who died in 2 months, over a 2-month period. And there are only how many? 12? It's like a kever achim, a group grave.
24
They had no space to bury everybody, so everybody's buried together.
2,500 people buried there.
How many?
2,500.
2,500, 2,500 people. 2 months period. Yeah, I mean, in a ghetto, people just perish every day.
They were populating in the ghetto, or that was like
Holocaust Memorial. There are hundreds of here. You have a number, some Jewish names.
That's what I wanted to talk about. Is this is as close as we're going to get? Okay. All right. So we have. Can I have your attention? It's an interesting story. You should know this. One of the big, I think the most significant stop in Budapest today, other than going to daven mincha and eating lunch, is this is a memorial. It's a problem. How do you memorialize the Holocaust? Yeah, in a sense, you can't. But okay, so somebody built a very beautiful artistic thing with every leaf has a name. In the background, though, is a memorial dedicated to a figure, an unusual figure by the name of Raoul Wallenberg. I'm going to tell this. Let me see you all.
Wait,
Here,
like Shelley?
stay where you are.
Wait, like Shelley?
No.
Oh.
Raoul Wallenberg, not a Jew, although he counted himself as 1/16th Jewish. What is, this is probably not what you expect me to ask right now, what was the highest grossing movie of all time adjusted to inflation?
Gone with the Wind.
That was very quick, Avishai.
Sorry.
Embarrassed on your behalf for knowing it so well.
Was that rehearsed?
That is good. Gone with the Wind starred...
Is that rehearsed?
No, really wasn't.
No, it's
Gone with the Wind
Gone with the
starred. Who are the stars of Gone with the Wind? 1939. Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress. Hattie McDaniel, the first Black American to win Best Supporting Actress. Who else did it star? You don't know?
I don't know.
No. Vivian Lee, Clark Gable.
I know box office trivia.
Leslie Howard and Olivia de Havilland. Okay, that's all irrelevant. But Leslie Howard was born Leslie Steiner. It's a man from Britain with adopting a southern accent. And Leslie Steiner's father was a Hungarian Jew. He was a pretty successful stage and Hollywood actor, and he couldn't stand Hollywood, didn't like all the trappings of it, went back to Britain during the war and started making British movies, and then he realized his father's family was perishing and he was doing nothing about it. He produced, directed, and starred in a thriller in 1941 called Pimpernel Smith, based on an earlier story of a courageous person, the Scarlet Pimpernel, who saved people during the French Revolution. But he had a scriptwriter write a contemporary story that takes place right after the Blitzkrieg, after the Nazis conquered Poland, and after they had concentration camps in Germany, and were already in their starting with their project of the destruction of European Jewry. In this movie, Pimpernel Smith, he played a hero who posed as an archaeologist with a bunch of American academic university students, who was going over to Germany to research an ancient Aryan civilization to see the Aryans really go. Remember, the Nazis fancy themselves to be this perfect Aryan race, and they're going to find records of this of Aryan people in the deep dark past. And of course, the Nazis were very thrilled, so they let them go without any difficulty. Meanwhile, the plan was to save Jews in this movie, and it's a classic old British theater where they're a movie where they're trying to save Jews. And they save many with great acts of courage and heroism. The movie was a major success in Britain and in America. It was banned all over continental Europe. In Sweden, paying attention to all the details, in Sweden it was banned even though Sweden wanted to be a neutral country. They were terrified of the Nazis. Don't forget, the Nazis were going to conquer the entire world. Remember the Gemara in Megillah, Vav Amud Aleph Amud Beis, it says that the Germans are going to one day try to rise up and destroy the world. And the Swedes were terrified, and so they banned the movie as anti-Nazi propaganda, but the British Embassy in Stockholm, Sweden, screened it anyway. And a young man, idealistic young man, Swede, and his half-sister Nina, the man's name is Raoul Wallenberg, went to the screening and were deeply inspired by the courage of the protagonist. It's a fiction. And when they went out of the screening, he turned to his half-sister and he said, I want to do something like that. Leslie Howard, interestingly, became a member of the British diplomacy wing. He traveled around to do what he could to fight on behalf of the Allies. He was in Portugal when he took a plane from Portugal back to England that was shot down by the Nazis. And one of the conspiracy theories, it's true, it's not true, but very possibly is that the Nazis killed him for his movie. One of the stars of Gone with the Wind. Meanwhile, what this movie did was it inspired this Raoul Wallenberg, and he himself became involved with Swedish diplomacy and got placed intentionally, specifically in Budapest, in Hungary, well, the Nazis had already come in March of 1944, but he came already in a few months later, and to do what he could to try to save the Jews. And he was the dashing Hollywood hero of a movie, but it was real life playing out, where he went and did crazy, self-sacrificing, daredevil kinds of missions In one story, there was a train of Jews being shipped to Auschwitz. Oh, what did he do? I did tell you what he set up. He rented. Do you know where it is? He rented a whole block of apartment buildings, and he said this is all Swedish ambassador territory. He had a building called the Swedish Library. He put a big sign. Okay, and everything was Swedish. Why? It was all a ruse. It was all a pretext to save the Jews and to hide them. He started writing. Fake. He forged citizenship for anybody who he could forge for every Jew to become actually a Swedish citizen. And as Swedish citizens, the Nazis and the Arrow Cross could not touch them. And he managed to rent these places. The Jews got in, and they were protected, and they were saved from the deportations to Auschwitz, from the murders in the ghetto, and from the murders on the Danube that we just saw. In one story, that was what I was about to say, he got onto a train that was just about to take off for Auschwitz. He got onto the roof of the train. The Arrow Cross is screaming at him, "Stop, don't go there." He starts writing as fast as he possibly can Swedish citizenship papers for the people, and he just handed them out to anybody who could take them. They shot. They didn't shoot at him. They were kind of blown away by everything that he was doing. They shouted at him. He ignored them. He then said, with incredible chutzpah, he said, "All Swedish citizens I hereby order," right in the presence of the Arrow Cross, "to come and follow me." And all these Jews with new Swedish papers marched off the train to and their lives saved. How many people he saved is kind of weirdly disputed. The lowest number, what did we just see, Yosef? The lowest number is something like 4,500. The highest number, 100,000.
Wow. So yeah, it's a big gap.
Evidently, they don't really know because everything about Raoul Waldenberg remains a secret. Sometime thereafter, he disappeared. And in this case, kind of a strange story. You'd have thought the Nazis, the Hungarian Arrow Cross would have gotten him. In this case, the Russians got him. The Red Army came in, arrested him, and they declared him dead in a prison from 1947. Almost certainly that was a lie. We don't know what happened to Raoul Waldenberg, but it was one of the big mysteries of the post-Hollywood Holocaust period that people claim that there were eyewitness sightings of him in a Moscow insane asylum as late as 1987. His sister, who had spearheaded the campaign, the same sister who saw the screening of the movie, I think she just died in 2018. But she tried as best she could to try to find what happened to her long-lost brother, who never got married, never had children. His legacy is in courageously saving Jewish lives. It's such the exception. He's called one of the people who was associated with him, was asked, how did he do this? He said he had intense divine love of human beings. We stood, a few of us last year, in Kovno by the house of a totally different figure, a Japanese diplomat by the name of Shun Sugihara, who, very similar parallel story, he also in a very short period of time earlier wrote a bunch of visas, a whole scam what they got away with to get them out to Kobe, Japan, later to Shanghai. He saved the entire Mir Yeshiva. Not to mention many other notable names. Anybody have a Dell computer? Yeah. Michael Dell, his parents got out with Shun Sugihara, sure. Who was asked sometime thereafter, similar question about Raoul Waldenberg, how did you do this? Don't you realize you took your life, your wife's life, your children's life in your hands by getting yourself to people you don't even know, strangers, not even your own nation. So Shun's reaction was, it was the normal human thing. Anybody would have done it.
Wow.
It's the map of the ghetto that it was. If you're paying attention, you see there's a lot of Jewish stuff going on here. Kosher market. Right? Kosher market right behind this and so on. You see the ghetto is an Italian word to describe what most of Europe did to the Jews to separate them from the regular Christian society. They put them in walls that were ghettos. Long before there were rappers who were all ghetto, right? So then you had the Jews actually, were the origins of the idea of ghetto, and the emancipation, the Enlightenment that we're talking about is when the ghetto walls fell down and the Jews were allowed to integrate in the non-Jewish society. And in a sense, the irony of all this, of course, is when they did this, they assimilated, they intermarried, they lost their Judaism. And the response to that, they thought that they're going to integrate successfully into the regular society. The Nazis went after anybody who was a Jew. They didn't care if they were religious. They didn't care if they were secular. They didn't care if you were even Jewish. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 said anybody who has one Jewish grandparent is counted as a Jew. And they threw them, ironically, after being liberated from the ghetto. They made these ghettos, which were in many ways death traps, as we described. And this is the Budapest ghetto, which only stood for a couple of months. Tomasz, anything?
Rob, is this the wall?
You want to listen? Tomasz is, again, so much information, but you have to get close to listen to
I
him.
also always learn something from you.
Okay.
And on each trip. So the ghetto existed in Budapest for something like 7 weeks. 7 weeks. There were more than 70,000 people squeezed in this very small area. On average, there were like 14 people in one room. Because there was no food, and there was only one source of water, so one for 70,000 people. Can you imagine? So even the people got thirsty and died of that. There were some illnesses, typhus rampant, and so.
And there was no medicine.
And there was no place to burn the bodies, so to bury the bodies. So after the Russian liberated this area, they found a few thousand bodies around the shul, the synagogue, around the synagogue.
What years are we speaking about?
November 44, so like 29, I think, November 44, the Jews were officially moved to the ghetto, and ghetto was liberated 17th of January 45.
People think.
No, 45. So the ghetto started 44, November 44. Yeah, so like.
Not even less than 2 months. People think of the ghetto. Sometimes people have heard of the Warsaw Ghetto. Will stand by a remnant of the Warsaw Ghetto because that's the Jews rebelled and they fought back against the Nazis as a place that you could actually survive. But in many instances, we went one year, if you remember, to Lodz Ghetto, where the conditions were so foul, the death rate daily was so staggering. It was much worse in some of these ghettos than, ironically, Auschwitz, because in Auschwitz, after selection, if they didn't select the person to go to be gassed, he was sent to a work camp, and they actually fed the prisoners in Auschwitz because they wanted them to do work in the next day. So the people died in every kind of death during this very bad period.
Also, this map shows you the.
Let's step back.
The limits of the ghetto, and
it's a tiny space.
They had to build the wall within 12 days. Yeah, so and there's one remnant of the wall. You can try to get there. Yeah, that's the memorial. We are on the border. We are somewhere here. Here.
And most of the ghetto doesn't exist anymore.
I think here you can find one piece of the ghetto. This is memorial to the ghetto.
Yeah.
This way.
Yeah, great.
This ghetto was built by the Nazis.
No, ghetto was the area where many Jews lived before the war.
Where?
Before the war.
They were built already, existing already.
Yeah, the area which was designed only for the Jews. Yes, and the Jews built the wall.
That means that the Bulgarians themselves were
Yeah,
anti-Semitic.
yeah.
In a place in a
They're putting up this monument.
survivors back to their old homes and occupied. And the Poles murdered them. 40 Jews were murdered in Kelsey after the liberation of the camps, after the war was over. Jews continued to face that kind of
Shamayim v'sar